Hi everybody, Dr. Joe Dspenza here. I wanted to take a moment before we begin this journey and give you an understanding of how we arrived at this formula that we'll be talking about through the course of this series. The formula is a combination of brain coherence and heart coherence, and when you combine those two, you have a more effective ability to be able to affect your body, your mind, and ultimately your life. So let me take you on a journey on how I discovered this whole process. In 1986, I was in a triathlon in Palm Springs, California. I was on the biking portion of the race and I was making a turn to merge to the right. And as I was approaching this corner, there were two cyclists on the corner and I was passing those cyclists and there was a police officer on the corner and he was pointing at me and he was telling me to make this turn and to merge with this the direction of the traffic. And as I was making this turn, passing these two bikers, he had his back to the traffic and there was a four-wheel drive vehicle going very fast. And it caught me from behind and catapulted me out of my bicycle. As a result of that, landing hard on the ground, the compression, the forces of compression caused 6 vertebrae in my spine to break. T8, T9, T10, T11, T12, and L1. And when you land that hard, the compression of the downward forces collapses the bodies of the vertebrae. Picture them as pillars. And when you compress the volume like that, the volume has to go somewhere. And in my case, it went back onto my spinal cord. The athoracic vertebrae, the arch where the spinal cord passes through, had broken like a pretzel. So I had multiple compression fractures of my spine. I had bone fragments on the cord, and I had the neural arch of the athoracic vertebrae compressing the cord. So in typical cases like this, there's a radical surgery that's done called the Harrington rod surgery, where they take off the back parts of your vertebrae and they screw in these long stainless steel rods, and the rods act as a cantilever to pull the spine off the cord. They cut open your hip and they take fragments of the bone and they paste it over the top to secure it so bone grows over it. And I had 4 opinions from 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California. And at the time, they told me that I probably would never walk again and that the surgery was my only option. Well, in 1986, you didn't really tell surgeons that you were going to seek an alternative method. But after 4 opinions, I went against the surgical recommendations. And I thought, well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything. I'm basically laying face down, and let me see if I could influence my body with my mind. And it sounds really easy philosophically, theoretically, intellectually. But when you're faced with crisis, when you're faced with trauma, when you're faced with some stressor in your life, we tend to focus on the worst case scenario. In other words, what we don't want to have happen instead of what we do want to have happen. And so I was a young guy in my 20s, and I had no reference. I was weighing what I knew from a medical understanding against what I didn't know, what was possible. And I began my journey. And for the first 6 weeks, I thought, I'm going to close my eyes, and I believe there's an intelligence within the body that's giving us life. It's keeping our heart beating, it's digesting our food, it's organizing all these metabolic functions behind the scenes of our awareness. And I thought, maybe I can make contact with this intelligence and give it a plan, give it a template, give it a design. And when I was completely satisfied with my creative design, then I would surrender the creation of what I created to this greater mind and allow it to do the healing, because certainly I didn't know how to do it. Well, those first 6 weeks were a dark night of the soul for me because I couldn't get my mind to do what I wanted it to do. And I believed that it was paying attention to me. And so I would start by reconstructing my spine, vertebrae per vertebrae. And then the next thing I know, I would go unconscious and I would be thinking about living in a wheelchair, or if I should sell my practice, or if I should sell my home. And I catch myself right in the middle of my creative design. And I realized that I didn't want that particular input to be the outcome. So I'd back up and I'd start all over again. But this time I'd be frustrated, I'd be impatient, I'd be angry, and then I noticed that it got harder. And I went through this process for those 6 weeks, and it would take me sometimes up to 3 hours. And when I was finished, I never felt satisfied that I really did it properly. But I guess it was enough for me to continue. And the other thing I said was I wasn't going to let any thought slip by my awareness that I didn't want to experience. And that sounds easy also. But over the course of those 6 weeks, I would keep catching myself going to the worst case scenario in my mind. I would keep watching my mind lose its attention span and lose its focus, and I would start over again. And after about 6 weeks, I started to notice that it started getting easier. I could control my mind a little bit more. I was able to stay present. I was able to go through the entire process with more ease, and it would take less time. And what I didn't know that I was improving my ability to pay attention, which is a skill, and the more you practice it, the better you get at it. I was learning how to overcome some emotions that are connected to the hormones of stress. And I was firing and wiring different circuits in my brain by repetition. And over time, the more I fired and wired, the more I was installing the neurological hardware in my brain. And the hardware started to become a software program. It started to become more automatic. It started to become more easy. And I remember this one morning, it was about 6.5 weeks into my injury, I went through the entire process and I never lost my focus from start to finish, reconstructing every vertebrae. And when I finished it, it felt like I had hit a tennis ball right in the sweet spot. I hit a golf ball just right. Something clicked. I clicked. There was a change that I noticed. And it felt right. And what normally took me 3 hours to do, I was able to do in 45 minutes. It was able to run through the whole entire process, and it seemed a lot easier. And right around that time, I started to notice significant changes in my body. I started to notice a lot of my pain going down. I noticed that I started feeling more sensations in my legs. I started to notice that I had more motor function. And I started to notice my body responding to my mind. Now, this was a critical moment for me because the moment I noticed changes that were taking place outside of me in my body from what I was doing inside of me, I started paying more attention to what I was doing inside of me, and I started doing it again, and doing it with more excitement, more enthusiasm, more inspiration, because now I knew I was making a difference. And now I started to look forward to doing this process instead of sometimes resisting it. And so now I had all this extra time, and I started thinking about things that I would love to do. I started thinking about watching the sunset again. I just realized how I took that for granted, and I started thinking about taking a shower or sitting at a table with my friends and eating lunch again. And those were the things that mattered the most to me, the simple things. And when I would finish my rehearsal of reconstructing my spine from start to finish without breaking my focus, I basically was saying to that intelligence that is always present with us, that I had to be present with it, take a look at this design. And I wanted it to know exactly what I wanted, and then when I was satisfied with it, I would just release it. I would let it go. I would surrender it to this mind. I started to select those possibilities that existed as potentials in my future. And when I thought about watching the sunset or taking a warm shower again because I couldn't, I would start to emotionally embrace those futures before they occurred. And I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I can tell you that my body started to believe I was living in that future reality in the present moment. It's so objective that when we're truly present, it doesn't know the difference between the real life experience of watching a sunset and feeling the emotion and the emotion that I was fabricating by thought alone. And it was the process of doing this that I believe began to make significant changes in my biology. I started to notice a lot of things changing. 10.5 weeks, I was back on my feet, and I was back in my office seeing patients at 12 weeks. And I knew then that on some level that I had made significant strides in what I was doing. And they wanted to cast me in a full body cast, and they had all these restrictions for me. But when I got back on my feet at 10 and a half weeks, I knew the day I was to stand up. I just knew it. When I knew I was healed, I put on that brace for about 5 minutes and realized there was no way I was going to live with this brace. And so it started a journey for me. I noticed that I was healed on some level. I had no pain in my spine. I had no motor dysfunction. I had no sensory problems. I had no pain in my lower back. I just felt better. And I started asking bigger questions like, how could this possibly happen? What did I do to make a difference in my body? And I started studying. I went to the local university, University of Washington, and I went to the library and I started looking in all these medical texts for answers to some of the questions I was asking. How does bone regenerate itself? Is it possible? I know the body can heal, and I know the power that made the body heals the body. And I knew that I had made contact with this intelligence, but how did it happen? What was the science behind it? And I couldn't find any of those solutions in any medical references that were conventional medical and scientific references. And so I had to start looking outside convention, and I started studying this concept called neuroplasticity, where it says that we're not hardwired to be a certain way for the rest of our lives, that the brain is adaptable and it's changeable and we can rewire our brain. I started studying some of that research, and I started studying epigenetics, that we're not doomed by our genes, that we are really marvels of adaptability and change, and we could literally signal new genes and change our expression of gene potential. And I started thinking about how the mind influenced the body, and I had to study psychoneuroimmunology, neurochemistry, and neurohormones, and then of course led me to quantum physics and how subjective mind has an effect on the objective world. And I started this journey of understanding my own personal transformation. And I think after you have an initiation like this, and this was my initiation, it was my wake-up call. In fact, I wouldn't be sitting here today if it didn't happen to me. I think when you have moments like this in your life and you have some transcendence of your conditions and you have a breakthrough, I don't think you can go back to business as usual. I don't think you could go back to being the same person again. And I was, in a lot of ways, the changed young man. And so I started my journey in looking to find answers, and did my best to combine both the spiritual understanding of what happened to me with the science. And so after a period of time, I started studying spontaneous remissions. I wanted to understand if there were other people that had same or similar conditions that were treating conventionally or unconventionally, and they were staying the same or getting worse, and all of a sudden they got better. And I wanted to know if there was a cause that somehow produced the effect. And so I interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people that had some type of spontaneous remission. And over time, I began to realize that those changes weren't so spontaneous after all, that there was some effect. And after interviewing many people, I found that there were 4 common things that I just want to briefly talk to you about, that they all had in common that had some effect on their physical body. Number 1, they all believed that there was an intelligence within them that was giving them life. That was that same intelligence that I just talked about. And its function is for balance, restoration, repair, and regeneration. It is to maintain the body in its balance. And all of those biological functions that you and I take for granted are under the control of the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is the automatic nervous system. And so they all believed that there was some intelligence that was giving them life, and they all believed that somehow, whatever you want to call that intelligence, they had to take time to begin to make contact with it and to begin to give it a specific design, just like I did. And again, once again, surrender their creation to this automatic mind that does the healing for us. The second thing they had in common is on some level they began to take responsibility for their own health. They started to say, what was my state of mind and body that may have contributed to this disease, whether it was cancer, MS, thyroid condition. What was it that I had been doing for the last 10 years or last 20 years that could have had an effect on it? What were the thoughts that I was thinking? What were the actions or habits that I went unconscious to? How did I speak? And they looked at certain emotions that they lived by that they may have mismanaged, and they started to become conscious of those unconscious states of mind and body. And this was an important element because this was the process of breaking the habit of being themselves. In other words, they started realizing that it was their unconscious thoughts and feelings and behaviors that had some effect on their body. And if they thought, well, if I was thinking, acting, and feeling this way, if I start to change my thoughts, if I start to change how I speak, how I act, if I could begin to give up certain emotions that keep me connected to the past and start feeling differently, would it begin to produce an effect in my body? And they began their own personal journey of changing from one state into another. I thought that was really important because when I started studying this, I realized that mind had the most dramatic effect on the body. And I went back to school and started studying neuroscience in more detail. And I started to discover that there is a very strong correlation between how we think, because every thought we think produces a chemical. That chemical signals our body to feel certain ways. When we have an unhappy thought, we feel unhappy. The moment we feel unhappy, the brain is always monitoring what the body's doing, and we begin to think more unhappy thoughts equal to the way we're feeling. And people get caught in these loops of thinking and feeling, and it's the redundancy of that cycle over time that creates the person's state of being. Now, it only takes a thought and a feeling, a stimulus and a response, a memory and an emotion to begin the conditioning process. And so it was an important time for people when they were beginning to break that cycle, they were willing to go through the discomfort that went along with it and start to believe that there was a new way of being. The third thing they had in common is they started thinking about who they did want to be. This is a really important moment because this started my whole journey. They would close their eyes and do their best to make contact with that intelligence, become conscious of their unconscious thoughts, notice their behaviors from the past, and look at the emotions they were feeling. And they just wanted to become so conscious of those states of mind and body that they wouldn't go unconscious the entire day. And they started thinking about, if I had another lease on life, if I had another opportunity at life, if I could start all over again, who would I be? Now, this is an important question because they started thinking about what thoughts they did want to put their attention behind. They started reviewing how they wanted to act. And when they were in the process of rehearsing who they wanted to be when they opened their eyes, or who they wanted to be in their new life, they were so focused and so present that the brain didn't know the difference between the real life experience that was creating the emotion, or the real life experience that was creating the event, and what they were imaging in their mind. And they started to, through mental rehearsal, begin to install new neurological hardware that ultimately became the platform of their identity. And it started me on the journey of studying this concept called mental rehearsal in more detail. And they didn't wait for their healing to begin to feel joy and to feel gratitude and to feel wholeness. They understood that they had to feel wholeness and gratitude and joy for their healing to begin. And so they went through this process of reinventing a new self. When they did this properly, they started to notice changes in their body. They started to notice they started to feel better every day. And the act of doing it repetitively every day caused them to feel better every day, and ultimately they became better. The last thing they had in common is that when they were in this inward process, they had long moments where they had lost track of time and space. In other words, in that inward journey, when they finished, they thought it maybe had been 20 minutes that went by, and it was an hour and 20 minutes. And they all of a sudden altered their perception of time. And when you and I are truly focused and we're inward, and we do this properly, we turn on the frontal lobe, which is the crowning achievement of the human being. That's the creative center of the brain. And the frontal lobe acts like a volume control. When we're paying attention to what we're doing and we're present, the frontal lobe doesn't want to be disturbed or distracted by any other external stimuli. So it lowers the volume to the circuits in the brain that cause us to process space and time. And that gives us the ability to be so present that time and space disappear. And so that understanding, for me, was a really significant understanding, because it helped me understand that we can really change from the inside out. So I wrote a book called Evolve Your Brain, and then there was a documentary called What the Bleep Do We Know, and that became a very popular documentary and opened people's mind up to what was possible as human beings. But when I was touring with the scientists and researchers that were in this movie, I started paying attention to the questions people asked when we were doing these seminars around the world. And they kept asking, our thoughts have some effect on our bodies, our thoughts have some effect on our minds, our thoughts have some effect on our lives. How do you do it? And I thought that was a great question. And the second thing is, if your personality creates your personal reality, and in order to create a new personal reality, you have to change your personality. Well, how do we change? And why is it so hard to change? And I thought that was a really great question. And the third question was, what do you do? And so we started teaching these seminars and one-day workshops around the world, giving people the basic understanding of quantum physics and neuroscience and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics and electromagnetism and brain waves, and piecing together this model of understanding based on my own personal experience, as well as what I had researched and what I understood. And I thought, my goodness, if it worked on sick people, if these were the things that people did in order to get well, if it's true, then we should be able to reproduce it. And then what if, not only if it worked on sick people, what if we helped people just change that weren't sick? Could that model also work? And so in these one-day workshops, we wanted to give people the understanding of how it was possible. And we taught these workshops for about a year, and then we started teaching second levels and third levels and more advanced workshops. And right after about 2 years, all of a sudden, we started seeing very significant changes in people's lives and very significant changes in people's health. I remember the moment I watched a woman with MS that was confined to a wheelchair for about 10 years, after one meditation, stand up out of that wheelchair and start to walk around. Actually, she was dancing around. And I realized right in that moment that something happened to that person. In other words, what happened biologically? What happened scientifically? Was there a change in gene expression? Was there a change in mind? What did she do that began to affect her body? And all of a sudden, I just could not go back to business as usual. There was too many questions that I had asked, and too much evidence now, because we started seeing it more and more as we kept teaching these workshops. And I thought, now we're starting to see these changes. Let's organize a team of scientists and researchers and begin to do some measurements. And so I wrote another book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and that was more of the how-to, teach people the beginning stages of how to change, how to unlearn and relearn, how to break the habit of their old self and reinvent a new self, how to prune synaptic connections and sprout new connections, how to deprogram and reprogram, unfire and unwire, refire and rewire, to lose your mind and create a new one. How do we unmemorize emotions that keep us connected to the past and then recondition the body to a new mind and to a new emotion that keeps us believing in a new future? And so we organized this team of scientists, and we started doing brain scans. We started doing quantitative EEGs. We were taking measurements of people that would come to our events, go through 4 days of training or 4.5 days of training, and then we would scan their brain at the end, and we wanted to see that changes weren't just in their mind, that they were in fact in their brain. And then we started doing something really important, is we started measuring people's brains in real time during a meditation to see any fundamental clues that could help us understand their inner workings. And we gained so much knowledge about the process of change and transformation. We measured heart rate variability. We know that when a person is resentful, when they're impatient, when they're frustrated, their heart beats very differently compared to when they're in a state of gratitude or joy or inspiration, or feeling care and kindness. We measured the energy of the room. We wanted to see if a collective group of people could begin to affect the environment around them, the energy in the room. We measured the energy fields around their body. We measured the energy centers of their body because we did certain things to influence those individual energy centers that are under the control of the autonomic nervous system. We measured gene expression. We now know that you can change your gene expression in 4 days. We measured immune regulation. We wanted to see if people gave up those emotions of stress and went into more elevated emotions, if it would strengthen their immune system, if it gave them more energy for growth and repair. We measured telomere lengths. We wanted to see if people could sustain the proper homeostasis and balance and self-regulate and do meditations every day for 60 days, only 5 out of 7 days a week, if it began to change their telomeres, the little shoestring caps on the end of the DNA that determine your biological age. And we saw that 3 out of 4 people that did their meditations on a regular basis changed their genetic destiny. They changed their future. And if you asked me over 10, 12 years ago if I thought that I would be seeing the changes that I'm currently seeing presently, I probably would have told you maybe once or twice, but there's been a huge shift. There has been a significant change. There's been a movement, and there's a momentum of people that are beginning to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I now know that when you give people sound scientific information, and science is the contemporary language of mysticism. It's science that demystifies the mystical. And once they can understand it and they can learn it, they're forging new connections in their brain. That's what learning is. If they have a model of understanding that they can theoretically begin to process in their mind and it makes sense to them, the research shows that if you don't review that information that you've learned, if you don't repeat it, if you don't think about it over and over again, the circuits that you've just forged will weaken and they'll prune apart and you won't remember. So if learning is making new synaptic connections, then remembering is maintaining them. So if a person can explain that to somebody and they can build that model with someone else and they can explain that model, they're beginning to install the neurological hardware in their brain in preparation for the experience. And as I said, the more they understand what they're doing, the more they understand why they're doing it, the how tends to get easier and they can assign meaning to the process. So we started putting people through this process, and then I thought, well, if we can set up the conditions in the environment and give them the proper instructions, a certain percentage of the people will get their behaviors to match their intentions. They'll get their actions equal to their thoughts. When they get their mind and body working together, they'll have a new experience, and that experience then enriches the philosophical circuits in their brain. And the moment those neurons begin to organize into networks, the brain makes a chemical, and that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. So the payoff from every experience is that chemical signature called an emotion. And so the moment they started to feel empowered, the moment they started to feel more unlimited, the more they started to feel free, the more they started to feel grateful from some experience, they were teaching their body chemically to understand what their mind is intellectually understood. And I started to realize that knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. And I started to see that people started to embody the truth of that philosophy from the experience. And that was the information that began to select and instruct new genes. And they started to change on a very basic level. But if you can do it once, then you should be able to repeat the experience. And the repetition of any experience neurochemically conditions the mind and body to begin to work as one. In other words, when you've done something so many times that your body now knows how to do it better than your mind, now it becomes innate in you. It's second nature. It's easy. It's familiar. You're mastering that philosophy now. It becomes you. You become that knowledge. And so I thought, my goodness, if we could capture that process of transformation and do the measurements, and we could interpret what those measurements are, we would have more information to teach transformation again. And if we could measure even more transformation. We'd gather more information to teach transformation. We could close the gap between knowledge and experience, and that's what I wanted. So then I wrote another book called You Are the Placebo, more about how the mind influences the body. And then at a certain point, I finally wrote another book called Becoming Supernatural, and I started to gather all of the things that we were doing at these 4.5-day events and to put them in a methodical way of teachings for people to have access, to have the tools that they need to begin to make significant strides or changes in their own lives. And so since that time and on this journey, we've discovered so many really important things that I want to talk to you about in this series. I can tell you that without a doubt that when you are analyzing your life or analyzing yourself within some disturbing emotion, and that emotion is derived from the hormones of stress. In other words, if you're feeling frustrated or angry or resentful or jealous or envious or competitive or fearful or worried or depressed or in pain or you're suffering or guilty or shameful, when you're living by those emotions and you start analyzing yourself or your life within those emotions, we saw that 100% of the time you'll make your brain worse. Because in a sense, those emotions are a record of the past, so you're thinking in the past. And secondly, the arousal of those chemicals drives your brain further and further into these more agitated or aroused states. I can tell you that it takes a long time for your personality to change your personality, that the ego takes a long time to change the ego, that the programs that we develop over time that become our identity have very little effect in changing programs. That the brain takes a long time to change the brain, that we started realizing that when people really understand how to become conscious, that the act of becoming more conscious and more aware elevates us outside of the program. In other words, we're no longer the program when we can observe who we've been. And so we started this journey with the interest in seeing what type of effects the mind and body have when they're working together. And we started to give people all those necessary tools for them to begin to practice in their lives. And over time, in these last 10 years or so, we have seen people heal themselves from stage 4 cancers many, many times. We've seen people heal themselves of MS, of rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, ALS, PLS. We've seen them heal from Parkinson's disease, traumatic brain injuries, brain tumors. We've seen them heal from endometriosis, Graves' disease, Hashimoto's syndrome, high liver enzymes, low liver enzymes, colorectal cancer, diverticulitis, impotence, prostatic conditions. We've seen leukemia go into remission, and this is like a 4-minute mile. The 4-minute mile was once considered physically impossible to do and to run a mile under 4 minutes until somebody did it. And once that person did it, within 2 weeks, another person did it. And then there's been over 1,400 people since that time that have broken the 4-minute mile. And what it is, it's a belief system. It's a level of consciousness that changes a culture in what's possible. And I think that we have so much great evidence now in our scientific measurements that you can change your gene expression, that you can rewire your brain, that you can make your brain work better, you can make your heart work better, you can change your energy, you can strengthen your immune system, you could heal, you can lengthen your life, you can change your brain chemistry. So we have the evidence in our scientific measurements to show what is possible. But we also have evidence and testimony that it's so important when a person in an event walks on the stage and tells their story of how they overcame stage 4 cancer. And it's not a glamorous story that's a Hollywood version. It's a real life person that tells you their account of their own personal change and transformation and the things they had to do in order to heal. And I look out in the audience many times when people are on the stage telling their story, and I'm watching people in the audience while they're standing in the presence of truth. In other words, that person who's telling their story is the living example of truth. When they're listening to that person tell their story, I'm watching everybody. They're all leaning in because this is evidence. This is testimony. This is a person that actually did it. And they don't look any different than anybody else. In fact, they look just like a normal person. And they're paying attention to what they're saying because this is not on television. This isn't on a commercial. This isn't some movie that they're watching. This is a real person. And when you see a person with 50 brain tumors stand on the stage and you see their scans, or you see a before and after scans, or you see a blind person from a stroke that was diagnosed as clinically blind, all of a sudden able to see, and you see the measurements of the change in the optic nerve function. When you see the tumor shrink 75% and you see the radiographic studies, there's evidence right in front of you. And this person's telling the story. That is the 4-minute mile. That's the person who's saying, I just ran a mile under 4 minutes. I just healed myself of this rare genetic disorder. And there's always someone in the audience that relates with them. There's always someone in the audience that says, well, if that person can do it, so could I. And we are piercing this veil of consciousness that tells us that we are far greater than we think. We are more powerful than we know, or more unlimited than we could ever dream. And my interest is to give people my greatest understanding of the truth from a scientific perspective, and numerous opportunities to experience it, nothing more. And we begin to lay footprints in consciousness. We begin to lay footprints in the quantum field that is information, that is memory in the field that says this experience now is available for other people. And when you see a person in three-dimensional reality who has healed themselves, you can't stop thinking about that person and what they did. And now you start believing in yourself. You start believing in possibility. And when you believe in yourself, you have to believe in possibility. And when you believe in possibility, you have to believe in yourself. So fast forward to today. We did 19 4.5-day events where we took enormous amounts of time to do all these scientific measurements. And then I realized that people were starting just to break through on those very last days of those 4.5 days, and we sent them home. And I started thinking, wow, why don't we do week-long events? What if we had people for a whole week and they could retreat from their lives and go from philosopher to initiating that philosophy, to initiate to mastering that philosophy, from knowledge to experience to wisdom, from mind to body to soul, from thinking to doing to being, giving them numerous opportunities to practice, learning it with your head, applying it with your hands, knowing it by heart. And so we started doing these week-long events, and it is the week-long events where we see the most significant changes. We've done 20 week-long events over the last 2 years, and I can tell you I have witnessed miracles that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. And there's a movement now that's happening. There's a momentum happening. And we've distilled it down after all the research into a very simple formula. And that formula is learning how to manage your brain and your mind and create more order or coherence in your brain, and learning how to self-regulate with your emotions and be able to change your emotional state on command so that you're not out of balance in your life. And to teach people then how to get beyond their identity, to get beyond their personality that's connected to their present personal reality. And the process of getting beyond themselves and creating from the field instead of from matter to matter begins to exert greater changes in their mind and their body and in their life. And so this series is about teaching you that process. I hope you enjoy it. Hey everybody, Dr. Joe here. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to spend a few moments with me. I want to just review just a couple things that we discussed in our last episode, just to remind you of what you're doing and why you're doing it, so that we get to the practical application, the how will get easier. Transformation, personal transformation, requires a concept in neuroscience called metacognition. I talked about this in the last episode, where we have to become conscious of how we think. We have to think about what we're thinking about. We have to become aware of how we speak, how we act. We have to notice and be conscious of how we're feeling in order to change. I want to also remind you that in order for you to change sometimes, you have to be still, that you have to close your eyes, that you have to disconnect from all the stimulation in your external environment, that you'll have to sit your body down, and it shouldn't be eating, it shouldn't be seeing, it shouldn't be smelling, it shouldn't be hearing too many things in the environment, it shouldn't be experiencing and feeling many things, and we have to get beyond our anticipation of the next moment and our memories of the past. And I kind of hinted to this in our first episode, because I talked about what it was that people did in order for them to begin to change their bodies with their minds, and ultimately change their lives. So let's start from the beginning. Science says that we think about 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day. The problem is that 90% of those thoughts that you think on a daily basis are the same thoughts as the day before. So if you believe in the idea that your thoughts have something to do with your life or with your future, if 90% of the time your thoughts are the same, then your life will stay the same, because the same thoughts always lead to the same choices. The same choices always lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors create the same experiences, and the same experiences produce the very same emotions. And those same emotions influence your very same thoughts. And your biology, your neurocircuitry, your neurochemistry, your hormones, and even your gene expression is always equal to how you think, how you act, and how you feel. And how you think, how you act, and how you feel is called your personality. And your personality creates your personal reality. That's it. That means then that the present personality called you has created the present personal reality called your life. Not your parents, not your ex, not your children. You create your life. So if your personality creates your personal reality, and you wanted to create a new personal reality, a new life, that means you're going to have to change who you are. You're going to have to change your personality. And that's exactly the first process of change, because you're going to have to start thinking about what you've been thinking about and change it. You're going to have to become conscious of your unconscious habits and behaviors and modify them. Then you're going to have to look at certain emotions that keep you connected to the past, and you're going to have to decide, do these emotions belong in my future? And I think one of the biggest problems that I discovered in the process of personal change and transformation is that most people try to create a new personal reality as the same personality, and it doesn't work. You literally have to become someone else. So there's a principle in neuroscience that says that nerve cells that fire together wire together, which means if you keep thinking the same thoughts, if you keep making the same exact choices as you did yesterday, as you keep demonstrating the same behaviors or talking in the same way, if those behaviors lead to the same experiences that stamp the same networks of neurons into the same pattern, all for the familiar feeling called you, and you've done that, just conservative here, the last 10 years, the constant firing and wiring begins to hardwire your brain into a very finite signature. And that finite signature in the brain becomes your identity, your personality. And by the time we're 35 years old, those constant firing and wiring begins to reproduce the same level of mind. And like a box in the brain, we become a series of memorized behaviors, unconscious emotional reactions, automatic habituations, hardwired attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions that become like a subconscious computer program. In other words, when you've done something so many times or repeated an action, made the same choice, keep creating the same experience over and over and over again, the brain begins to create a software program where you can do it more automatically. And by the time we're 35 years old, we become a set of memorized programs. So now, that's 95% of who you are by the time you're 35 years old, a set of programs. So then, when it comes time to change, most people are using 5% of their conscious mind to go against 95% of what they've memorized subconsciously. This becomes a problem because you can think positively all you want. You could say, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm healthy, I'm abundant, I'm abundant, I'm abundant. You could say that with the 5% of your conscious mind, but the problem is the body may be programmed into something else. And when you're saying, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, your body's saying, no, you're not. You're miserable, you're unhappy. So that thought never gets past the brainstem to influence the body because the mind and body are in opposition. So then it makes sense then that new thoughts, new information, when you learn something new that leads to a new way of thinking, should lead to new choices. New choices, when applied, should lead to new behaviors. New behaviors then should create new experiences, and new experiences should create new feelings and new emotions, and those new feelings and new emotions should inspire new thoughts, and that's called evolution. So then your brain is a record of the past. It's an artifact of everything you've learned and experienced to this moment. So most people then, when they wake up in the morning, the first thing they do is they start to think about their problems. And those problems are memories that are etched in the brain that are connected to certain people, certain objects, certain things at certain times and places. And the moment they begin to think about their problems that are memories from the past, they're thinking in the past. By the same means, because they've experienced those problems, every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So the moment they think about their problems and they start to feel unhappy, they start to feel discouraged, they start to feel anxious or fearful, now their body's in the past, because thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So I say that if you're not being defined every single day by a vision of the future, then you're left with the memories of the past and you will be predictable in your life. Now think about this. A person who's remembering their problems and firing the same redundant circuits in their brain every single day, they're not conscious they're doing this, and they're waiting for the feeling of unhappiness to hit their body. Their body is so objective. It does not know the difference between the real life experience that's creating the emotion and the emotion that person is fabricating by thought alone. Their body is starting their day, in a sense, believing it's in the same past experience that it was the day before. Now, it only takes a thought and a feeling, we talked about this in the first episode, a memory and an emotion, a stimulus and a response to start the conditioning process. And so most people wake up every single morning conditioning their brain and body into the past. Now, the moment the person starts to feel unhappy and they start saying, oh, now I feel like my normal self, it's those emotions of unhappiness that begin to influence the very same thoughts that they were thinking the day before. You start to think unhappy thoughts, which then starts to make chemicals for you to begin to feel unhappy. The moment you feel unhappy, the brain's monitoring how the body's doing, and it generates more corresponding thoughts equal to those feelings of unhappiness. So thinking creates feeling, and feeling creates thinking, and thinking creates feeling, and feeling creates thinking. And the repetition of this cycle over time conditions the body to become the mind of that emotion. Now the person's body is literally in the past, and the body is believing it's living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That means now the person's starting their day in the familiar past. So then it means then, in order for us to change, we have to be greater than those emotions that have been stored in the body. We have to be greater than our bodies. But then most people, instead of turning to their partner or to their loved one that they're sleeping with and give them a hug and a kiss, they turn the other way and they go to their cell phone. And 86% of the population in the Western world goes to their cell phone as soon as they wake up. And they check their texts and their WhatsApp and their Instagram and their Facebook and their LinkedIn and their emails and the news. And now they're connected to everything known in their life. And they get up and they do the exact same thing that they did the day before. They use the toilet, they use the coffee machine, they get a shower, they get dressed, they eat breakfast, they sit in the same chair, they watch the same news channel, they're checking their emails, they're working on their phone, they're eating with the same hand, facing the same direction, they drive to work, they do the same things, they see the same people, they go to the same places, they keep re-experiencing the same events in their lives. And in a way, we can take their yesterday, their same yesterday, and set it on their tomorrow. Which means then, if you keep doing something over and over again, a habit is a redundant set of automatic, unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through frequent repetition. A habit is when you've done something so many times that your body now knows how to do it better than your conscious mind. And we could say then, through routine then, a person now, their body is dragging them into the same future based on what they did in the past, and they've lost their free will to a program. And now they're on autopilot, which means then they're in a predictable future, the same future based on their past. So then to change then is to be greater than the body and its habituations. So then if you're not being defined by a vision of the future, and you get up and you return back to the same familiar life, every person, every object, everything, every place, every experience that you've had has a neurological network in your brain. And because you've experienced all those elements in your environment, it makes sense then you have an emotion associated with them. You may have an emotion that's connected to a coworker, that's different than a different coworker, that's different than a friend, that you have a different relationship with your car. It has a feeling when you think about it. That every element in your outer environment has an emotion associated with it. Which means if you're not waking up in the morning and being defined by a vision of the future, the moment you wake up and open your eyes, and it's your senses that plug you back into the environment, as you see the same people and as you go to the same places and you do the exact same things at the exact same time, it's no longer that your personality is creating your personal reality. Now your personal reality is creating your personality. Your environment is controlling unconsciously how you feel and how you think. So if your environment is controlling how you feel and how you think, and you're seeing the same people and going to the same places and doing the exact same things at the exact same time, that means then you're thinking and feeling equal to everything that you know, everything that's same. And as long as you're thinking and feeling and reacting equal to everything that you know, then your life stays the same. That means then to change is to be greater than your environment, to be greater than the conditions in your world, to be greater than the circumstances in your life. So then if your day is good and things are going well and you feel happy because everything's going well, but the next day or later in the day something goes on or something goes wrong and you feel unhappy, and I say to you, why are you unhappy? And you say, I am this way because of this person or this circumstance. What we're unconsciously agreeing to is we're saying that that person or that circumstance is literally controlling my feelings and controlling my thoughts. And if something in your environment is controlling you, your feelings and your thoughts, it means you're a victim to the circumstances in your environment. And when things go good, you feel good, and when things go bad, you feel bad. But in a sense then, to change is to be greater than those circumstances in your environment. Now think about this. It makes sense then that the environment is so strong that it influences our state of being. It influences the way we think and feel. And if our state of being, if our thoughts and feelings literally begin to produce effects in our lives, if we're thinking and feeling equal to everything known in our lives, then our lives will stay the same. If the body has been conditioned into the familiar past, or it's been habituated into the predictable future, and we have to be greater than our bodies, and if this is the familiar past and this is the predictable future, and this is the known and this is the known, then there's only one place for the unknown to exist, and that's the sweet spot of the generous present moment. That is where possibility exists. Then it makes sense then that in order for us to start this model of change, we would have to sit down and close our eyes and disconnect from the environment before we started our day. That means then, if you're sitting and closing your eyes, there's less sensory information going into your brain. If you were to put earplugs in or play soft music and put headphones on, the headphones and the soft music would limit the amount of things that you would hear in the ambient environment that would distract you. The music would kind of fill the space. If you were sitting down and you weren't eating, and you weren't smelling, and you weren't tasting, and you weren't getting up and moving around and feeling and experiencing, there would be less sensory information coming into your brain and body. In the act of sitting your body down and making it sit still, you are training the animal. You're asking it to stay still. And if you're not thinking about your schedule of what you have to do in the next few minutes or what happened yesterday, and you're laboring for that present moment, then we're beginning to understand this model of transformation or change. Meditation means to disconnect from your environment, to sit your body down and to be greater than your body, and no longer live in the enslavement of the past or the future and find the present moment. And when we do this properly now, here comes all the programs. In other words, all of a sudden when we sit down, all the thoughts that have been happening behind the scenes of our awareness starts to come to the surface. How long is this going to go? I don't have enough time. I have emails to do. I have to check my text. I have this meeting. I have that appointment. Your brain is in the habit of doing that. And if you become conscious that you're doing that, or it says I can, or this is too hard, just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. The next thing is that if your body wants to get up and start moving and start its day, and it's been programmed to do it like that because it's done that for a long time, and you become aware that it's doing that, and you settle your body back down in the present moment, that's a victory. Now you're executing a will that's greater than the program. Now this is where people give up on their meditations, because then they'll say, I can't meditate. But in a sense, you're actually doing your meditation right. If you start thinking about certain experiences from the past that create certain emotions, instead of you feeling fearful and feeling unhappy and thinking that you have no control over it, if you settle your body back down into the present moment, now you're telling your body it's no longer the mind, that you're the mind. And the act of doing this, we've researched, is like training an animal. Sooner or later, your mind and body slip into the present moment. And when it does, there's a liberation of energy. Now you're freeing yourself from the chains of that same familiar past or that predictable future. And now you make room for the unknown in your life. So, a little homework for you to do between now and the next class. Simply write down certain thoughts that you no longer want to think. I want you to think about, I can't, it's too hard, I'll never change, my life is bad, whatever you believe in. Become aware of how you speak, how you act. Write those down. Look at certain emotions that you feel every single day that bring you to a lower level and decide, should I take these emotions in my day-to-day or can I change them? The first step to change is to become conscious of who we are so that we can make those changes. I'll see you in the next episode. Hi everybody, Dr. Joe here. Welcome to episode 3. In episode 2, we asked you for your homework to begin to deconstruct or denature the present personality that's connected to your present personal reality. And the act of this concept called awareness or metacognition is a function of your frontal lobe. That frontal lobe is the seat of your conscience. And when you can pay attention to how you're thinking, when you can become aware of those thoughts, when you can become aware or conscious of how you act, when you all of a sudden become aware, I'm feeling unhappy or I'm feeling guilt, and I didn't even know it was unhappiness or guilt because I feel like this all the time. That act of observing those programs, those states of mind and body, mean you are no longer the program in that moment. You're the consciousness observing those programs, and you begin to objectify your subjective self. That's the first step to change, and it's called metacognition. Now, most people wait for crisis or trauma or disease or diagnosis. They wait for some tragic event to happen in their life where they feel so altered. They no longer feel like themselves. They're not interested in returning their emails or their texts. They're not interested in going out to dinner and seeing the same people. All of a sudden now they start disconnecting from their known life and they start observing who they've been. And the act of doing that, when you no longer feel like yourself and you feel so altered that you begin to see yourself through the eyes of someone else, that's the first process to change. Now, my message is, why wait for that? Why wait for that point where you're at your lowest denominator to begin to see yourself? Why not be defined by a vision of the future? In other words, most people don't create a future because they believe in their past more than they believe in their future. Most people are resigned to possibility because they romance their past, or they're more in love with their past than they are with their future. Why not romance or fall in love with another future? Most people love to tell the story of their past, and I'm asking people to tell a new story of their future. So, this process of transformation and change then is going from one state of mind and body to another state of mind and body. And in order for you and I to do that, here's the old self and here's the new self. And in order for us to arrive at the new self, we have to cross this river. And the hardest part about making changes in your life is not making the same choice as you did the day before. Now, I want to warn you that the moment you decide to do something differently, the moment you decide to make a different choice, get ready, because it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to all of a sudden feel unfamiliar. There's going to be some uncertainty in your life. You're not going to be able to predict the next moment. That's because the moment you say, I'm changing this about myself, and you begin that process of change, you're stepping into that river. Now, if you're in the familiar past or you're craving the predictable future, the moment you decide to make a different choice and you step into that river, remember, the body has been conditioned to be the mind. Now the servant is the master. And the moment we declare this in our lives, like, I'm going to exercise, or I'm going to do my meditations every morning, or I'm not going to eat after 6 o'clock in the evening, or I'm not going to curse, I don't know, or not going to complain. The moment you decide to change something about you, and your body has been conditioned or habituated into the same chemistry and the same neurological input, the moment you do something differently and you step into that river, the body is leaving its known familiar territory, and so is the mind. And the body wants to cling to what it knows. It's the mind now. And it's so objective, it only knows what it knows based on familiarity. So the moment you decide to no longer complain or make excuses or feel sorry for yourself or judge another person, the moment you decide to change something about you and you step into that river, the body all of a sudden notices it's no longer in the known. You've just stepped into the unknown, that void. Now, the body, which has been conditioned or habituated to be the mind, wants to return back to what it knows. So all of a sudden, it starts influencing the mind. And this is when you start to hear that chatter in your head. You start to hear those thoughts. Why don't you start tomorrow? This is too hard. You'll never change. Nobody else is changing. It's my ex's fault. It's my mother's fault. I don't have enough this. I don't have enough that. How long is it going to take? These are the thoughts that the body is influencing. And if you respond to that thought as if it's true, that thought is going to lead to the same choice, which is going to lead to the same behavior, which is going to create the same experience, which is going to produce the same feeling or the same emotion. And then you're going to say, this feels right. But I want you to know that that feels familiar. So going from the old self to the new self, crossing that river, there is a biological death that goes on. It's happening neurologically. You're pruning circuits. Inhibiting firing of certain thoughts begins to weaken its connections. No longer making the same choices, no longer producing the same neurochemistry, no longer producing the same hormones, no longer producing the same chemistry or feelings to the body, no longer signaling the same genes with the same emotions and the same behaviors. This process of change, going from the old self to the new self, is the neurological, the biological, the chemical, the hormonal, the genetic death of the old self. Now, when you're in that place called the unknown, this is the perfect place to create from. People say to me all the time, well, I can't predict my future. I always tell them the best way to predict your future is to create it. Now, here's the fun part. When you decide to overcome that personality and become so conscious of your unconscious self that you wouldn't go unconscious in your waking day, this is a good day to be alive. If you said, okay, before I get my coffee, before I take my shower, before I use the toilet, before I check my text, before I check my WhatsApp, before I check my Facebook, my Instagram, before I grab and go into the habit of connecting to everything in my life through my cell phone, what is the greatest expression of myself that I could be today? This is the moment where you're leaving the bleachers and you're stepping onto the field. What if you said, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? And if you just decided to put all of your attention on those thoughts, the act of thinking those thoughts over and over again, anything is possible. Great things happen to me. I'm excited about my day. If you keep firing and wiring those thoughts, you begin to install the neurological hardware in your brain by firing and wiring. Now, if you keep doing it over time, that hardware will become a software program, and that will be the new voice in your head. That voice telling you you can do anything or anything is possible is the circuit you installed that is the new thought that will be talking to you in your head instead of I can't or it's impossible. What if you said, one day, one lifetime, I'm going to live a great day today. How would greatness live? And with your eyes closed, you began to rehearse in your mind your particular actions, the things you were going to do. Now, the act of closing your eyes and mentally rehearsing who you're going to be when you open your eyes and what you're going to do, if you're truly present and truly focused, the imagery in your mind begins to install the neurological hardware in your brain. In other words, when you're present, the brain does not know the difference between the real-life experience and the act of imagining. You begin to change your brain to look like you already did it. Now the brain is no longer a record of the past. Now, by installing that neural hardware, it begins to become the map of the future. And if you keep doing it over and over again, the hardware then becomes a software program, and you're going to start to naturally act that way. You may just naturally act happy. There's no mystery there. You installed the circuits to do that. So now, if you then can say, now this is the challenging part, how would I feel if I had an amazingly successful day today? How would I feel if I mastered my day today? How would greatness feel? How would abundance feel? How would health feel? And you said, I'm going to teach my body emotionally what the future feels like before it happens. That means you're not waiting for your wealth to feel abundance. You're not waiting for your success to feel empowered. You're not waiting for your new relationship to feel love. You're not waiting for your healing to feel wholeness or gratitude. You're not waiting for the synchronicity or the mystical moment to feel awe and wonder. That is the old model of reality of cause and effect. This is polarity. This is duality. This is where we're living in emptiness and lack from our lives. And we're waiting for something in our environment, some experience out there to take away our emptiness or lack. That is, for most people, spending their whole life waiting for their life to change in order for them to feel better, believing they have no influence on that. That's kind of the classical model of Newtonian physics. But the quantum model of reality is not about cause and effect. The quantum model of reality is about causing an effect. That is, the moment you start feeling worthy and abundant, you are generating wealth. The moment you start feeling empowered and your body starts to feel it, now you are stepping towards your success. The moment you're in love with yourself and you're in love with life, you begin to draw equals to you. The moment you start feeling gratitude and wholeness, that's the moment your healing begins. And when you're in awe of life, you are going to have a synchronicity or a mystical moment. Now that's causing an effect. So then most people then have to make some changes in their beliefs because they have been hypnotized and conditioned into believing something out there has to happen in order for them to feel better here. We're teaching people the exact opposite. The moment you feel that emotion and you are truly present, your body begins to believe it's living in that future reality in the present moment. So then, that biological model of change that we talked about, the unlearning and relearning, the breaking the habit of the old self to reinventing the new self, the pruning of synaptic connections and sprouting new connections, the deprogramming and the reprogramming, the unfiring and the rewiring, the losing your mind and creating a new one, to learn how to unmemorize emotions that have been stored in the body and then begin the conditioning process to condition the body to a new mind and to a new emotion, is the process of change. And the word meditation literally means to become familiar with. So when you're sitting in your meditation, and I'm going to give you some homework to do and we'll practice a meditation, it makes sense then that when you become familiar with and conscious of your unconscious thoughts, and you're so conscious of those unconscious thoughts that you wouldn't go unconscious to those thoughts in your waking day. They wouldn't slip by your awareness unnoticed. If you were to become conscious of how you speak or how you acted, and you saw a videotape of yourself in one day acting unconsciously, and you could observe yourself in your meditation doing that, I promise you that you would catch yourself from speaking certain ways or acting certain ways because you would be aware. And that's the process of change. You would become so familiar with those behaviors that you would not go unconscious to them in your waking day. And if you said, my goodness, this feeling that I live by every single day is suffering and pain, but I never thought of it that way because I just feel like that all the time. And now you're conscious of how you've been feeling. This process then of becoming familiar with is exactly what meditation is. And this is where people think they're doing their meditation wrong. And I want you to know that when you start this journey and those things come up, they have to come up and you have to be conscious of them. Now you're lighting a match in a dark place. And I want you to become so familiar with your old self that you don't go unconscious back into that 95% of those programs. And then I want you to become familiar with a new self, with new thoughts and firing and wiring them, and new behaviors and rehearsing them over and over again. And then physically rehearsing them in your day. Why? Because if you keep practicing the firing and wiring, it'll begin to become familiar to you. It'll begin to become more automatic. And if you trade resentment and frustration and anger and fear for joy and freedom and gratitude, and you keep making those chemicals, and you do it every single day, it's going to begin to become familiar to you. So then going from the old self to the new self and crossing that river is an important element in the model of change. But now I said that most people reach their lowest level before they make up their mind to change. Well, my question is, if you could go to an elevated state and all you have to do is combine a clear intention, a vision of who you would like to be at the end of that day, with an elevated emotion, thought, feeling, stimulus, response, memory of the future, some new possible reality, and begin to emotionally embrace it. It's the combination of that clear intention and elevated emotion that begins to condition the brain and body into a new future. And the moment you start feeling that elevated emotion, and you start feeling altered or changed before the event occurs, the moment you feel that emotion, you're going to begin to pay attention to the picture in your mind. And now we could say then, you're beginning to remember your future. And from that elevated state, you could see the old self from an elevated state instead of a limited state. And my question is, which would you prefer? So then if you were able to get up in a whole new state of being, and you were thinking differently, acting differently, and feeling differently, and if you were able to maintain that modified state of mind and body, independent of the conditions in your environment, independent of the drives and cravings of the body to return back to its normal state, and independent of time, if you could do that every single day, you would begin to see different effects begin to happen in your life as a result of your efforts. Now, the synchronicities, the opportunities, the serendipities that begin to happen around you are a direct effect of changing the way you think, the way you act, and the way you feel. Now, you already know how to do this. We are wired to be creators. You have done something great at least once in your life, and you got a great idea somewhere. And when you got that great idea, like what would it be like to be in shape, or to be healthy, or to be happy, or to be in a new relationship, or have a new job, and you got inspired by seeing a new possibility. Most of the time, people, when they select that new possibility in the field, they start to feel the emotions of what it feels like before it happens, and they're giving their body a sampling or a taste of the future. You've done that, and no person, no thing, no object could talk you out of it. This is an important moment, because that's the moment your mind and body were aligned to a destiny, and you made the right choices, and you kept doing the right things, and you kept setting goals and creating those experiences, and every time you thought about those goals, you arrived at those goals, you start feeling more of those emotions of your future. And you thought about the thoughts that you weren't going to listen to, the choices you had to stop making, the things you had to stop doing, the experiences you had to stay away from with certain people at certain times, and the emotions that would bring you back to your past, where you would lose sight of that future because you'd be looking at that future through the lens of the past. We've all done this. And then you start seeing your life starting to change, and it's so much easier to forget your vision of the future than to remember it, and it takes practice in order to do that. So in this meditation that I want to talk to you about, we are going to teach you how to write down a combination of those thoughts you wrote down in your last homework assignment, the thoughts that are standing in the way between you and your future, the behaviors that you'll have to stop executing, the emotions that you're going to have to trade for elevated emotions. I want you to write those down and deconstruct that personality. At the same time, we're going to reconstruct a new personality. What thoughts do you want to believe in that you want to fire and wire in your brain? What behaviors? What acts? How can you be in one day? What emotions would you choose to live by every single day? And we're going to put you into an altered state, very light state, and all I'm going to do is have you become aware of your old self, familiar with that old self, so aware, so familiar that you don't go unconscious the remainder of your day. And then we are going to become familiar with, fire and wire, install new circuitry, condition your body emotionally into a new future. And as an experiment, we want to see, as you go from one personality to another, if you could catch yourself in your waking day and not believe certain thoughts, not speak unconsciously certain ways, don't act and feel in those same familiar patterns. And by doing that and beginning to think about who you want to be, let's try an experiment. Let's see how it begins to affect you in your life. I hope you enjoy it. Sit up. Eyes closed. Take a breath. And relax. Your body. Feel. and relax it. Feel your body relaxing. Slow it down. And inhale through your nose all the way to the top. And hold it. And exhale and relax. And inhale through your nose in one slow breath all the way to the top. Hold it. And exhale. And relax. More. And inhale through your nose and hold it. And exhale and relax. Your body stay there. It's time to become conscious of your unconscious thoughts. So conscious of these thoughts, they'll never slip by your awareness unnoticed again. What are those thoughts that you can't bring into your future, that's connected to your old personality? Review them. Remember them. Make them conscious in your mind. So conscious, you'll never go unconscious to them again. Commit them. To your memory. One more time. again. They may not pass today. What behaviors, things you do, habits, how you speak unconsciously that you'd like to change. What are those behaviors? View yourself acting that way and remind yourself that those behaviors don't belong in your future. Make them so conscious, be so aware of them, you would never go unconscious to those habits again. What will you stop doing? Commit it to memory so you catch yourself in your waking day. That's change. And what emotions and feelings that keep you connected to past experiences that you can't take into your future? What feelings bring you back to the old self that influence your thoughts and behaviors? Name them. These are the feelings that will cause you to no longer see or believe in that future. They cause you to look at that future through the lens of the past. What feelings and emotions must you be aware of and notice? So you don't lower your energy today. Become conscious of them. Remind yourself who you no longer want to be. And commit it to your memory. Thoughts, behaviors, emotions that belong to the old personality self. These you must be conscious of your entire day. So conscious that you don't go unconscious to the old self. It's time to create a whole new personality that leads to a new personal reality. It's time to change your energy and become someone else. What thoughts do you want to fire and wire in your brain that you want to put your attention and intention behind, that will become the voices in your head that encourage you? Review them. Repeat them. Feel them. Install the hardwiring, the hardware that becomes your natural thoughts in your brain. Again, remember these thoughts. Feel them so you remember them. And repeat them until they become easier to remember. Again, firing and wiring. Put some feeling behind them so you remember them. These will be the new voice in your head. Again, feel it. What behaviors, what things will you do today? How will you act? Rehearse mentally who you're going to be when you open your eyes in this day. Rehearse your actions, how you'll be with certain people, certain conditions, and remind yourself of these actions, installing the hardware in your brain. Rehearse what you're going to do, who you're going to be when you open your eyes. Again, rehearse in your mind how you will act today, even how you stand, how you breathe, how you smile, what you do. Review it, priming your brain for the act. Firing and wiring new circuits in your mind, changing your brain by thought alone. Again, making it easier each time to act this way, the more you review it. Feel it. And now, can you teach your body emotionally how your future will feel before it happens? What emotions will you feel when you arrive at your dream? Feel it with all your heart. And allow your body to respond to your mind. Feel it conditioning your body into the emotions of your future. Feel it. Experience it. Embrace it. Let your body get a taste of your future. With an elevated emotion. Feel it. Embody it. Become it. And feel into your future. Feel it. This is your connection to your future. And remember this feeling. It's your connection to a new future, a new personality, a new personal reality. Feel it and remember this feeling. Changing from the old self into a new self. Investing in yourself is investing in a new life. Believing in yourself is believing in possibilities. Reminding yourself who you no longer want to be. To remind yourself of who you'll become. Practice it every day and see the changes within you and all around you. Change your mind. Change your life. Now you're ready for a new life. Now slowly bring your awareness back to a new body. To a new life. And to a whole new future. Into a whole new time. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and present yourself to the world of 3 dimensions. In this space and time. Welcome back, everybody. Dr. Joe here. I hope by now you have practiced that meditation as a experiment to see then, by making internal changes, if it begins to produce some effects in your body or in your life. Now, I want you to know that I've been at this a very long time. And I want you to understand that when I get stuck in my life, when I have to make changes, significant changes for myself to adapt to a new life that I'm stepping into, that I go back to these very basics that I'm teaching you. I take out a piece of paper and I start thinking about the thoughts that I've been thinking, the behaviors or actions that I want to change. I start looking at myself during the day and what emotions I'm feeling and living by. And then I want to study great people in history. I want to learn their qualities and attributes. And I want to think the way they think. I want to behave the way they behave. I want to feel the feelings that they have felt. And the more knowledge you have, the more you learn about something, the more likely you will be to construct a better model. Now, what do I mean by that? I do this all the time because I'm interested in evolving myself. That's what plasticity is about. So when you ask yourself a question, what would it be like to be healthy? What would it be like to be happy? What would it be like to be more evolved, to be more mystical, to be more empowered? When you ask that question, you turn on that creative center in your brain called the frontal lobe. Now, that frontal lobe is 40% of your entire brain. It's the newest piece of machinery in the human brain that allows us to create. And it's the executive, it's the boss, it's the CEO, it's the symphony leader. When you ask that frontal lobe question, what would it be like? You turn on that creative center. Now, what most people don't know is the frontal lobe, because it is the executive, has connections to the entire brain. The CEO knows what everybody's doing. So you ask the question, what would it be like to be wealthy or to be healthy? Or happy? Now the frontal lobe's got to answer the question. So it only has a certain number of, or a certain amount of resources stored in the brain. And the resources are the things you've learned intellectually, or the experiences that you've had in your life. So when you ask the question, what would it be like to be wealthy? What would it be like to be healthy? The frontal lobe's got to answer the question, so it starts looking out over the landscape of the entire brain for associated neurological networks of things you've learned or experienced in your life, and it begins to call them up it begins to activate them. And when it gets enough circuits activated, those circuits begin to fire in tandem. And when they start firing in tandem, all of a sudden you get a picture in your mind, and that's called intention. So it makes sense then, the more you learn, the more you study, the more you fill your brain with knowledge, the more resources or more raw materials you are using to create a better experience. The more experiences that you've had, the more you can call on those circuits to build a bigger model. So when the brain all of a sudden freezes a frame, a picture, and you're selecting a new potential in the quantum field, a new possibility, as I said, when you do that properly, when you hold that clear intention and all of a sudden your brain starts to animate it, it starts to bring it to life. And the next thing you know, you start feeling the emotions of that future. You're combining a clear intention with an elevated emotion, and that process, thought being the vocabulary of the brain, feeling being the vocabulary of your body, and how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. You're changing your state of being from the same familiar person thinking and feeling a certain way to thinking and feeling another way. Now, the stronger the emotion that you feel from some experience in your life, the more altered you feel inside of you, whatever the event was, whether it was a shock, a betrayal, a loss, an event that caused you to all of a sudden break out of your normal chemical continuity. The moment something changes you from your environment and you feel altered, that change in your internal chemistry causes you to wake up and pay attention to what's causing it. And the moment you do that, the brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot, and that's called a long-term memory. And that memory is embossed in the neural architecture. The problem is people think within the circuitry of that past experience, and they feel within the emotions of that event as well. And so most people start their day and their life living every single day in the same familiar state of being. So then you say to the person, well, why are you so angry? Why are you so afraid? Why are you so sad? Why are you suffering so much? They'll tell you, I am this way because of some experience or some experience in my life that's happening that's keeping me feeling this way. Which means then one event in a person's life or a series of events in a person's life has changed them biologically into a state of being. And what they're really saying is, since those series of events, I haven't been able to change since. So then you ask them, what happened? And they will recount the story, but the latest research on memory says that 50% of what we talk about in our past isn't even the truth. That means people embellish the story. They make up things just to excuse themselves from changing. They make it harder. They make the conditions more intense to say, it's impossible for me to change because of that event. And to me, that means a person's reliving a miserable life they never even had, just to reaffirm or excuse themselves from permission from changing. So then how do we change out of that state? Well, it makes sense then if you can begin to select a new possibility in the future and you get clear on what that vision is, and you begin to feel the emotions of your future. The stronger the emotion that you feel from what you're creating inside of you, the more joy or freedom or excitement you feel from that internal event that you're creating. The more you change your chemical state into an elevated state, the more you'll pay attention to the picture that you're thinking about in your mind. And you're going to begin to emboss that experience neurologically in your brain. In other words, you're going to begin to remember your future. And you're going to begin to think neurologically within the circuits of that new experience that's about to happen. And you're going to feel chemically within the emotions of that future. And how you think and how you feel is your state of being. Now, if you keep practicing this every single day, it's going to begin to become familiar to you. And the key is then when you finish your meditation, you can't get up as the same person who sat down. Now, what do I mean by that? If you finish your meditation and you feel exactly the way you just started, I would say to you, nothing really happened to you neurologically, biologically, chemically, hormonally, genetically. You're still the same person. And more than likely, when you return back into your life, your environment is going to influence how you think and feel, and you're going to return back to that old state of being. So then here's the questions. Can you believe in a future that you can't see or experience with your senses yet, but you've thought about enough times in your mind that your brain is literally changed to look like the event has already occurred? The latest research in neuroscience says it's absolutely possible. You can change your brain just by thinking differently. And can you select a new potential in the quantum field? And there are infinite potentials in the quantum field. And can you begin to emotionally embrace that future reality before it's made manifest to such a degree that your body, as the unconscious mind, being so objective, doesn't know the difference between the real life experience that's producing the emotion and the emotion that you're creating by thought alone, to such a degree that your body begins to change to look like that experience has already occurred epigenetically. The latest research in epigenetics says you can change your body just by thinking differently. Now, if you practice this every single day by combining that clear intention with the elevated emotion, conditioning your body into the future emotionally, and branding that circuitry into your brain, if you keep doing this on a daily basis, every single day, there's going to be evidence in your brain and body to look like that experience has already occurred. There's physical evidence in your brain and body to look like it has already occurred, and more than likely you will be in a new state of being, and you will feel like when you finish your meditation every day. Think about this. If you got up connected to the feelings of your future when you finished your meditation every day, and you were able to maintain that modified state of mind and body throughout the entire day, you would no longer be looking for your future. Why? If you feel like your future has already happened because you're feeling the emotions of it, you wouldn't be separate from it. You wouldn't be in polarity or duality or lack, waiting for it to happen to make you feel better. You would be feeling the emotions of your future. Why would you look for it? Now, we would say then that this is the moment where you're no longer in lack or in separation. This is the moment, if you're able to maintain that state your entire day, that the synchronicities, the opportunities, the coincidences, the serendipities that begin to appear in your life means then that you are moving out of one frame of the same reality into another frame of a new reality. And you have to be able to maintain that modified state of mind and body your entire day. And if you can, get ready, because unusual things will begin to happen in your life. And they will come in ways that you least expect, that you can't predict. Why? Because if you can predict them and expect them, they're nothing new. They're more of the same. They have to rock your world. They have to catch you off guard. They have to leave no doubt that what you're doing inside of you begins to produce an effect outside of you. And when you can correlate the changes that you're making inside of you with the effects you're producing outside of you, just like me in my own personal injury, I started to pay attention to what I was doing inside of me to produce those effects outside of me, and I started doing more of it. And when you start to see those events begin to happen in your life, the universe throwing breadcrumbs in your direction, telling you to follow the breadcrumbs, keep doing what you're doing, you're going to pay attention to what you did, and you're going to do it again. And you're going to believe more that you are the creator of your life by changing your thoughts and feelings instead of the victim of your life. And when those synchronicities happen, and they happen to a lot of people that do this work, the energy, the emotion that they feel, and the surprise. Now, the brain learns by mistakes and surprises. And I say we could use a few more surprises. When you're caught off guard and this event all of a sudden happens to you, and you are surprised and in awe that something just happened that you have been working on creating, and you are in the present moment, more awake and more alive than you've been in a long time, you're going to remember that you created that experience. And two things will happen. The experience produces an elevated emotion of awe and worthiness and freedom and inspiration and a love for life. And that is the natural state of being. You are going to use that emotion to create your next experience. In other words, it's going to be easier for you to create the next experience because that emotion you're going to use to create the next event. The second thing that happens to numerous people when they are so caught up in the present moment, so awake and so alive that they're realizing that they are the creator of their life, they look back at their entire life, all the things they regretted, all the circumstances that they wish they could have changed. They look back at their entire past and they don't want to change one thing in their past because it brought them to the present moment. And that is the moment the past no longer exists. And there are people in this work that have had brutal pasts, tragic pasts, with abuse physically, sexually, emotionally. They have been traumatized or shocked by very difficult events. And when they break through and they have their own personal transformation, and they look back at their life, not from the same person, but from a different person with a greater understanding, they can look back at all the sequences of events and they understand that they had to go through all of those different experiences to bring them to their moment of freedom, to bring them to their own moment of transformation. Now, this is important for people because people only talk about their past. People only revisit the past. People only obsess about their past when they're feeling a certain emotion. It's the emotion that causes them to recall the past. When the person is truly changed, it's hard to change back. They no longer are excusing themselves from the past. They no longer belong to the past. This is the moment they belong to the future. And many people that have had personal healings in this work, you could say to them, after they've healed themselves of a rare genetic condition, where they've healed themselves of cancer, where they've healed themselves of an autoimmune disease or an endocrine disease, how come you no longer have that disease or that condition? They will tell you that condition exists in the old person. I'm literally somebody else. They didn't visualize the tumor shrinking. They didn't visualize the blood values changing. They literally became a different personality. And that new personality is connected to a new personal reality. And this then begins to become the objective. And so I'm so proud of our community. I'm so proud of the people that do this work, the thousands and thousands of people around the world that do this work, because they're not caught in the philosophical realm. They're waking up every single morning in the creative process. Why? Not because they feel like they have to do it. They do it because they don't want the magic in their lives to end. They want to continuously see those coincidences and opportunities to continue to appear in their life. And when they do, they're using the energy of every synchronicity, of every new opportunity, of every coincidence. They're using the emotion that's created from the surprise for their next creation. And they're not waking up dreading the creative process. They're excited about the creative process. They're anticipating a new future. They're anticipating synchronicities. They're anticipating unusual events, unexpected events to happen in their lives. So one of the most difficult parts about all of this is making the time to do it. And when you carve out a little time in your precious life to retreat from your environment, you don't have to go to the Himalayas or to a monastery. You could close your eyes and sit in your bedroom. You could sit in your office. You could sit your body down and have it not get up and experience things, and you can tell it like training an animal to stay. And you will decide when to feed it, when to serve it, when to clean it, when to take care of it. But this is the moment where you're not being defined by your environment. This is your moment to not be defined by the needs, cravings, or drives of your body, and to not be caught up in the predictable future or the familiar past, to labor for the sweet spot of the generous present moment. And in the next episode, I want to talk to you about what it means to find that sweet spot of the generous present moment, the unknown, where that is the perfect place to create from. And so we'll talk about brain coherence. We'll talk about the present moment. We'll talk about disconnecting from your body, your environment, and time, and becoming pure consciousness. And we'll begin the model now of what it means to create brain coherence, part of the formula for you to begin to execute greater changes in your mind, in your body, and in your life. I'll see you next time. Sit up. Eyes closed. Take a breath and relax. Your body. Feel your body. And relax it. Feel your body. Relaxing. Slow it down. And inhale through your nose all the way to the top. And hold it. And exhale. And relax. And inhale through your nose in one slow breath all the way to the top, and hold it. And exhale. And relax. More. And inhale through your nose and hold it. and exhale. And relax your body. Stay there. It's time to become conscious of your unconscious thoughts. So conscious of these thoughts, they'll never slip by your awareness unnoticed again. What are those thoughts that you can't bring into your future, that's connected to your old personality? Review them. Remember them. Make them conscious in your mind. So conscious, you'll never go unconscious to them again. Commit them. To your memory. One more time, again. They may not pass today. What behaviors, things you do, habits, how you speak unconsciously that you'd like to change? What are those behaviors? View yourself acting that way, and remind yourself that those behaviors don't belong in your future. Make them so conscious, be so aware of them, you would never go unconscious to those habits again. What will you stop doing? Commit it to memory, so you catch yourself in your waking day. That's change. And what emotions and feelings that keep you connected to past experiences that you can't take into your future? What feelings bring you back to the old self that influence your thoughts and behaviors? Name them.
These are the feelings that will cause you to no longer see or believe in that future. They cause you to look at that future through the lens of the past. What feelings and emotions must you be aware of and notice? So you don't lower your energy today. Become conscious of them. Remind yourself who you no longer want to be. And commit it to your memory. Thoughts, behaviors, emotions that belong to the old personality self. These you must be conscious of your entire day. So conscious that you don't go unconscious to the old self. And now it's time to create a whole new personality that leads to a new personal reality. It's time to change your energy and become someone else. What thoughts do you want to fire and wire in your brain that you want to put your attention and intention behind, that will become the voices in your head that encourage you? Review them. Repeat them. Feel them. Install the hardwiring, the hardware that becomes your natural thoughts in your brain. Again, remember these thoughts. Feel them so you remember them. And repeat them until they become easier to remember. Again, firing and wiring. Put some feeling behind them so you remember them. These will be the new voice in your head. Again, feel it. What behaviors What things will you do today? How will you act? Rehearse mentally who you're going to be when you open your eyes in this day. Rehearse your actions, how you'll be with certain people, certain conditions, and remind yourself of these actions installing the hardware in your brain. Rehearse what you're gonna do, who you're gonna be when you open your eyes. Again, rehearse in your mind how you will act today, even how you stand, how you breathe, how you smile, what you do. Review it, priming your brain for the act. Firing and wiring new circuits in your mind, changing your brain by thought alone. Again, making it easier each time to act this way, the more you review it. Feel it. And now, can you teach your body emotionally how your future will feel before it happens? What emotions will you feel when you arrive at your dream? Feel it with all your heart. And allow your body to respond to your mind. Feel it conditioning your body into the emotions of your future. Feel it. Experience it. Embrace it. Let your body get a taste of your future. With an elevated emotion. Feel it. Embody it. Become it. And feel into your future. This is your connection to your future. And remember this feeling. It's your connection to a new future, a new personality, a new personal reality. Feel it and remember this feeling. Changing from the old self into a new self. Investing in yourself is investing in a new life. Believing in yourself is believing in possibilities. Reminding yourself who you no longer want to be. To remind yourself of who you'll become. Practice it every day and see the changes within you and all around you. Change your mind. Change your life. Now you're ready for a new life. Now slowly bring your awareness back to a new body. To a new life. And to a whole new future. Into a whole new time. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and present yourself to the world of 3 dimensions. In this space and time.